My story is one of just the adventure I've gone through the last 8 months as I've come to start using AI platforms in one way or another. Let me begin by explaining that my actual background a long time ago was as a librarian, that's my original academic qualification. I spent 10 years as one. And my experience of working in libraries was always the feeling that despite the time when we were moving from those old card indexes to online indexes, etc., didn't really matter because people somehow thought that I was some form of AI because as a librarian you were expected to know the answer to absolutely everything on every occasion. But the reality of it is that I've also discovered over time that we are moving through into a world where we expect a lot of the future and we expect technology to always be treating us with something new. Now, we already heard text mining mentioned, and of course, for many of us, text mining has become a regular tool that over the last maybe 5 to 10 years we've taken up, and there's a number of great tools like Odin Text and others that really help us picture data in different sorts of ways. We also have available to us a whole bunch of new apps that are actually doing some of the work for us in terms of analysis. A good friend of mine, Kim Walker, has a product called the AF app, which is age-friendly app. It's basically something you download onto your screen. You can use it to ask yourself a bunch of questions, analyze any product or service, and it feeds back to you what is the age relevance of that particular product or service. So automatically giving you the answers that perhaps we would normally have done through a more elongated research process. So lots of interesting tools and apps, but maybe not true AI. But then again, what is true AI? In a world in which we think we can find answers through our computer for just about everything, we are also sometimes missing out on the point on, well, what is different forms of AI or automation and what can they do for us? So my own experience has been to look around and try to understand the meaning of AI, the science and engineering of intelligent things, as it was originally called in the 50s. I think the best answer I heard recently, a lady named May Marker from the United States explained to me that AI was basically something a machine was doing where you didn't know it was a machine, you thought it was a human doing it. And I think that's a pretty good sort of answer and an interesting way of qualifying it. But what I'm also interested in is the idea of, well, how does it fit into market research? Now, interestingly, like as people that know me know as my habit, whenever I'm starting to look at a new subject, I just go to Google and I don't actually read the articles, I just look at the images and see what the anomalies are. If you look up AI for market research, this is the screen you get, and you could be sitting there going, well, I'm not too sure how most of that has got to do with directly with market research, although I will point out that congratulations to our friends at Brain Juicer, because on the top of the page there is a thing about their Digivisuals process and system. So I guess they've actually cracked the AI model. But it does leave me thinking about how does AI fit into Qual work? Now, as you heard, I worked for a big ad agency for over 25 years, McCaughan, and one of the things I did at McCaughan was to establish their global platform for doing ongoing research into people's lives, and which was primarily qualitative. We did a lot of ethnographic work, we did a lot of one-on-one interviews with experts, and we did a lot of traditional focus groups and group discussions. So I've been interested in actually figuring out, well, what does that mean in terms of AI, and how does Qual fit, and how does it help me do what I do, which is primarily developing stories. I help brands develop the stories and how they're going to tell their stories. And of course, what that really means is that I'm trying to build new narratives, across a brand situation or a particular market situation. Now, the narrative definition that I prefer to use is something that I looked up online, and a report of connected events, real or imaginary, presented in a sequence of written or spoken words and or moving images. In other words, it's a sort of story, but what it actually has is it's connecting a whole bunch of different things into a connected story that's allowing me to understand the situation more fully. Something that most of us are actually asked upon to do in market research in one way or another. So if I'm trying to find narratives, how do I find those? What I was interested in when I started to discover there were some machines that were helping us build narratives in unusual ways. This is a very interesting, simple example of what I mean. somebody I know was asked to look at the question of how do you actually reach hardcore Liverpool football fans? Now, for those of you that know anything about football, you know Liverpool is one of the most famous clubs in the world. Its football fans are extremely devout. How do you actually reach them, and how do you actually find out what their habits are, and find out what things would really connect to them, and build a narrative around that? What was interesting that was a case I heard where this was put into an AI platform. That platform generated an answer that after 25 years in advertising, I don't think I would have ever thought of. And when I've trekked with many, many colleagues, none of them ever came with the answer. The number one medium that the machine suggested to reach hardcore fans with was, in fact, eBay. And the suggestion that if you want to reach hardcore fans, they are going to be the people that go to eBay to look for tickets, mementos, shirts, signed footballs, etc. They're going to be the people that are really interested in these items, and that by actually using eBay as if you like, a communication method, you're more likely to get to the people that really make a difference. As I said, it was interesting simply because nobody I knew in the industry would ever have guessed of considering eBay as a communication vehicle for that sort of issue. So that got me looking around more at what kind of platforms were available, and got me involved with a company called Significant Systems, which is a company that's been around for a few years that has developed an artificial intelligence platform that really looks at what's the narrative going around online about any subject. It searches the internet for narratives around a particular subject area and helps you evaluate those narratives in a number of ways. I'm now working with them in different ways with an agency that I've started to form with some friends called AI Agency, where we're taking on board different AI platforms and trying to figure out how to use them to create new forms of narratives. What does it actually do? Well, let me explain what this platform does. As opposed to social listening, for example, text mining, focus groups, subject matter experts, etc., what we're really doing here with this type of AI platform is to discover and categorize narratives and then rank them in terms of their efficiency, in terms of the media that they use, in terms of the conversations that are driving them, the content that drives them, etc. And then also the machine measures their emotional effect, which gives us a great deal of information that we can use to try and generate new answers and new type of proposals in developing narratives for clients. So let me just run through quickly what it provides. When the machine is asked a question, we, for example, will ask it a question around Liverpool Football Club, and it will go in after we've provided some input. It will search the internet across anything that's published there, and then plot narratives that it discovers around that subject on this sort of scale, where it's looking at four defined areas of information. Narratives that are transient, which are ones that are perhaps ongoing, but not particularly very strong, but not particularly ones that are going to have any real role in creating the future, of changing the dynamic of the subject, etc. Tribal narratives, which tend to be more ones that have a very fast peak of interest and then fall away, usually ones that are very important to a very small group of people for a very short period of time. Timeless narratives, which by its name tend to be those narratives, storylines, etc., that are going on and on forever, will always be important. And then transformative narratives, which are more ones that are framing the future. A very small number of narratives in any subject areas, we all know as good researchers, are things that are helping us identify what's likely to be happening in the future. The map actually, the landscape as it's called, that it produces looks more like this. You can see each of these points on this landscape represents one of the narratives that the machine has found. It scales the narratives across the landscape itself, across those four quadrants, and then it also scales them with a color code that defines the depth of the content. So the richer the color, the more indicative of the fact that it has a very rich content level with a lot of detail, etc. A lighter color usually means that there's content there, but perhaps it's not so important, not so strong, and maybe not owned by one particular source very well. So red basically says this is something you should be looking at because it's very important, it's got a lot of depth. Lighter colors means not so important, or more likely not so heavily, not such heavy content, and so maybe opportunities for you to own that area. What it also does under each of the narratives is give you one of these, what we call effect measures. So just like we do in qualitative research, where we basically sit there, listen to answers, and then qualify the answers we get by the emotional drive behind the answers we hear about how we think people really feel, how involved they really are. The machine does that by analysing the content around each narrative and describing it in terms of both the depth, the richer the colour, the more heavy the particular effect is, and the variety of emotional effects that are available to it. This helps us understand really what's going on with the subject, with the narrative, and gives us a guideline as to what kind of approach we might want to take if we're pursuing that narrative for a particular answer. We also get a whole bunch of other measures. We get what we call a media power index. This is actually looking at the contents underneath each narrative and telling us exactly which narratives are driving the content, which ones carry the best content. On the right-hand side of your screen, what you'll see is a whole bunch of pictures. This is a montage that's built where the machine actually goes into the content under the narrative and builds a montage of key pictures from the content available. Again, just like in a focus group where you ask regular people to build montages, the only difference here is that on the real screen, when you hit each of these particular pictures on the montage, it takes you directly to the source article, video, etc. All of this helps me really understand what's going on and build a storyline and understand which narratives are most important, what's the information behind them, how they're being driven. This is really interesting because suddenly I'm getting to a whole bunch of depth that can be done literally within 24 hours. And if you like, running focus groups or large-scale focus group across the internet in a very short space of time. Let me give you three quick cases. We were looking at some subjects related to India and diabetes. In one particular area, we found there was a narrative that was around India, diabetes, and the continuous monitoring technology that's now available. You know, little wristbands that help you decide whether or not your sugar levels are too high, etc. This is the sort of finding we got. It told us that it was a transient type subject in India, one that was a little bit frustrating, a little bit not very involved. People were having a bit of a hard time with the subject. It was, although, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, one that delighted people. Again, one of the illustrative measures of emotional effect that we get. So we could see that those people that were interested in it were delighted that it was happening, but it was transient because there wasn't enough new information coming around about it. What we also saw then in a related narrative where we just looked at the narrative that was being built around Indian diabetes, we saw that here there's a sort of constant disgust that's going on. It's timeless. The issue just keeps on going on, but people are sort of disgusted because they feel it's getting nowhere, that not enough is being done, that perhaps the technology and the government and other bodies are not actually moving at making enough advances to help what is becoming a chronic problem in the Indian marketplace. Of course, as I said, what we're able to do is we get emotional effects, we get literally montage boards that allow us to find what is the real content driving the subject, to watch the articles, read the videos, etc., etc. The third case, again related to this, it was sort of interesting because we then looked into a narrative that popped up that said it was about India diabetes. And what this is actually about was the fact that there was a lot of disgust going on in the Indian marketplace regarding the fact that there was a big perception that the Indian diet was actually a major cause of diabetes. Now, that would have been interesting enough, but not particularly interesting to build a story around or do something with. But what we did find was that the machine popped up and said that there was a particular strong content media power index against Facebook. And then what we looked at, and when we looked at that, was it told us that within Facebook there was a loose community of people sharing special diets, special recipes on Facebook that were aimed at diabetics, and that if you were a company or an organization that was trying to get involved with the diabetes debate in India, perhaps what you should be doing is A, looking at that particular medium of Facebook, B, looking at what the content was to look what was driving interest, and perhaps trying to enter that discussion and be part of that discussion on what kind of foods were available and diets and recipes were available that could help people with diabetes in India. No, very short examples, but the reason for telling you that whole story is quite simply this. I guess, I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I've been around for an awful long time, done a lot of things. And what I'm learning very quickly is that in a world of more and more automation, there's just so many opportunities that I can learn from and that I can expand what I'm doing with to create new narratives, new stories, and help brands in many, many different ways. And I hope that it's not too late for everybody else to join in and be part of that, I guess, revolution that's happening within our industry as we learn how to use all these new technologies. Thanks.